The water came up through the floorboards of my brother's truck while he was still inside his own house, 300 feet away, deciding whether I was worth swimming for. I have pulled 41 people off of roofs in my life. I count them the way other people count birthdays. 41 up. And 9. I couldn't reach. 9 sets of fingers that slid out of mine into brown water while a rotor tore the air apart above us. 9 is the number I say to myself when I can't sleep. Not 41. 3 days before the water came, my father set down his fork and told me I played soldier one weekend a month, and I shouldn't go around town calling that service. My mother looked at her plate and, in one of her clearer moments, said, "I was always restless. I never wanted this life." My brother smiled. And I did what I have always done at that table. I said nothing. I let the 4 of them keep the small, safe version of me they'd built across 50 years, because I thought, God help me, that swallowing it was a kind of love. Then the storm. They'd all laughed off on the little hand-crank radio turned north in the dark, and the parish road went under. And the camp got quiet the way a place gets quiet when it understands that nobody is coming. Nobody, that is, except the one person my own blood had spent a lifetime deciding didn't count. There's a postcard in the chest pocket of my flight suit right now, soaked through. The ink's run. It says, "Greetings from Houston," in cheerful orange letters, postmarked August 2017. And in about 72 hours, it's going to walk into a room and end my brother. Without me raising my voice once. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 3 days. To the fork. And the water nobody at that table thought would reach us. If you have ever been the one your own family made small, the one whose whole life got summed up in a sentence by the very people who were supposed to see you first, do me a small favor and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Then stay with me, because what my parents found out that weekend, they found out the hard way, and it started with a fork going quiet against a plate. The call came from my mother on a Tuesday, 6 words, in a voice that was already half somewhere else. "Come to the camp, Delia, please." I drove 6 hours. I want to be honest about something, because if I'm not, none of the rest of this makes sense. I didn't drive 6 hours because they'd earned it. I drove because that's the shape my love takes. It has always been a one-way road with my family. I show up, I fix the generator, I refill the propane, I recock the boat, I leave. I have flown into a Category 4 with less hesitation than I feel pulling into that gravel lot. The camp sits on stilts at the edge of the marsh where the parish runs out of dry land and gives up. My grandfather built it. The screen door has never once latched in my lifetime. You have to lift it and set it, lift it and set it, and even then the wind takes it. The weather radio on the counter is the hand crank kind, and it only pulls one station clean. A man out of Lake Charles who reads the marine forecast like he's reading last rites. My right shoulder doesn't come all the way up anymore. 20 years of taking a stranger's whole weight on a hoist cable does that to a joint, and it aches before weather the way some people's knees do, which meant I felt that storm in my body 2 days before the man on the radio ever named it. I didn't say anything about that either. In my family, you don't mention what your body knows any more than you mention what you've done. You just carry it. My brother Wade was on the porch when I came up the steps. 46, sunburned, a beer sweating in his hand at 4 in the afternoon. He didn't get up. "Look who found the time," he said. Wade. 20 years of postcards, he said, and he smiled when he said it, so it would sound like a joke and not like a knife. That's what we get, little postcards from wherever. And now you drive down when Mama can't remember what day it is. I let it sit. I've gotten good at that. There's a thing that happens in my chest when a man like Wade talks. My heart rate actually drops. They clocked it once in a physical, 60 and steady when it should be climbing. I don't know what to tell you. My body decided a long time ago that the way to survive certain rooms is to go still. The way you go still on a hoist when the aircraft is bucking, and the only thing between a stranger and the water is how quiet you can make your hands. Inside, my mother was smaller than the last time. Coralie Rourke was a parish beauty queen in 1966. There's a photo on the wall of her in a sash, and she'll stop in front of it some days and ask who that pretty girl is. She lit up when she saw me. Then a cloud went over it, and she asked if I'd brought the boys home from school, and there are no boys there, never were. And I said, "Not yet, Mama," because that's easier than the truth. And the truth doesn't stay put in her head long enough to be worth the pain. But I want to be careful here, because the disease is real and the choices were also real, and I won't let one hide the other. My mother is losing herself now. She was not losing herself for the 50 years she spent watching my father take me apart at that table and choosing, every single time, to study her plate. On her clear days, even now, she takes his side. That's not the dementia. That's just who she decided to be a long time before her mind started to go. Dinner was the 6 of us. Me, Wade. His wife Tammy, who has a way of counting the food on your plate with her eyes. Their daughter Josie, who's 9, and the only person in that house who looks straight at me. My mother. And my father. Harlan Rourke is 75 now, and he has spent every one of those years measuring men. By their trucks, by their handshakes, by whether they served, and how, and where. He served himself, a long time ago, and he has never once let anyone in that parish forget it or measure up to it. He forgave Wade for never putting on a uniform, because Wade is his son, and Wade stayed, and a man who stays is a man. He never built a yardstick I could pass. Mine was cut so that a daughter who left, and who does the kind of service he refuses to call service, would always come up short no matter what I laid on it. He waited until we were all seated. He likes an audience. Delia's got herself a little air show this fall, he said to Tammy, like I wasn't there. Weekend warrior. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. He speared a piece of chicken. You want to know what your tax dollars buy? That's it right there. She plays soldier 1 weekend a month. I served. I wouldn't go around town calling what she does the same word. The fork clicked against his plate. My mother looked at hers. Wade smiled. And Josie, 9 years old, mouth full of cornbread, said, Aunt Dell flies helicopters. She flies a desk baby. Wade said easy, and everybody laughed, and Tammy said something about war tourism, about how some people just like to go looking at other people's disasters, and my mother said mild as milk. She was always off somewhere, and I sat there with my hands flat on my thighs counting the whir of the ceiling fan, 4 seconds a rotation the way I count anything when the alternative is opening my mouth. I want to tell you, I set them straight. I didn't. I have a distinguished flying cross in a box in a storage unit in another state, and I have never once in 30 years laid it on a table in that house, because in my family. Correcting the record is the same thing as bragging, and bragging is the one sin they would never forgive a woman for. So I let them keep the version they liked. I passed the beans. Here is the strange, small thing I remember most about that night. After dinner, Josie took my hand and pulled me down the hall to her room, and every inch of her wall over the bed was covered in postcards. Mine. 20 years of them. Greetings from Biloxi. Greetings from Homestead. A card from a gas station outside Fort Polk with a picture of an alligator wearing sunglasses. And in the middle, in a place of honor, greetings from Houston, orange letters, a little water-stained even then. Grandma says they're just clutter, Josie said. Grandpa says worse. I keep them anyway. We sat on the floor, and I let her ask me about the pictures, and I lied a little the way you lie to a child. I helped some folks who got flooded, instead of the truth. Instead of the truth. Which is that behind that orange postcard is a rooftop in Houston in August of 2017, and a woman who handed me her baby before I could reach her, and then the water, and then 9, not 41. That was the breathing part of the night. The floor, and Josie, and the postcards drying under a lamp, and one child in that whole bloodline who had decided, without being asked, that I was real. The knife came later, in the kitchen, from Tammy, and she didn't even know she was holding it. She was drying a glass, not looking at me, and she said, half to herself, Well, at least the land's all settled now. That's one thing off Wade's mind. Settled how? I said. And she looked up, and something went across her face. The look of a person who has just heard the sound their own mouth made, and she said, Oh, you know, just the paperwork. Wade handled all that years ago. I didn't say anything, I dried a plate. But my whole life is windows. Fuel windows, weather windows, the 90 seconds you have before a rooftop goes under, and something in me had just seen a window open and I stood in that kitchen and started, very quietly, to fly toward it. The next morning, Wade made it official, the way he makes everything official, loud, in front of witnesses, so that later he can say you agreed. We were on the porch. The Lake Charles man on the radio was talking about a system in the Gulf, a low that had a name now, Odette, and Wade turned him down mid-sentence like you'd turn down a mosquito. While everybody's here, he said, I want to get the land squared away, legally, so there's no confusion when Mama passes. He didn't look at me, the camp, the 12 acres, it's in my name. Has been. Dell signed her interest over years back. She was never going to use it, never around anyway, so I just wanted on the record that we're all good. I signed my interest over, I said. You did. When was that? My father cut in. Does it matter? You weren't ever going to sit on this porch, Delia. You made that choice a long time ago. Wade's the one who mowed it and paid the taxes and drove your mother to her appointments while you were off looking at hurricanes. And here's the thing I need you to understand. Because it's the thing that made this hard. He wasn't entirely wrong. Wade did drive her to her appointments. Wade did sit with her the night she forgot how the stove worked and nearly burned the place down. I was in Puerto Rico that night, or Florida. I honestly can't remember which disaster, and that's the whole indictment right there, isn't it? I was somewhere saving somebody else's mother while my brother was here saving mine. So I understood Wade's resentment. I understood it in my bones. Every one of those postcards on Josie's wall, I could suddenly see them the way he must have seen them for 20 years. Not, I'm thinking of you. As I chose them over you. Again. That's the thing about being the one who runs toward other people's catastrophes. From the inside, it feels like duty. From the kitchen table, it looks exactly like abandonment. But understanding a man's grief is not the same as letting him forge your name. And notice who did the caring in that indictment. Wade did. My father did none of it. My father drove no one to any appointment. He sat up with no one at any stove. He kept, across 5 decades, one job in that family, and that job was to sit at the head of the table and decide what everyone at it was worth. So I could grant Wade his 20 years and still know that the loudest man in the room had earned exactly none of the ground he was standing on. Let me stop the story right here for a second, because this is the place it split me in two. If you have ever loved a family that only ever watched you leaving, and never once asked why, tell me about it in the comments, where you're watching from and who it was. I read every single one. And if you believe that being someone's blood should never mean handing them your own name to forge, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because on this channel we always read the whole receipt, front and back. And the back of this one, the part not one person at that table saw coming, is only 3 days and 1 hurricane away, so stay with me. And I was already fairly sure the paper was forged, because I did the arithmetic in my head, the way I always do, and I could not for the life of me make the dates work. So I did what I do. I went quiet, and I went to work. That afternoon, I told them I was driving into town for aircraft parts, which was a lie, the first real lie I'd told them in years, and it's strange how good it felt. To finally aim my discipline at them instead of at swallowing what they did to me. I found a spot behind the feed store with 2 bars of signal, and I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the parish clerk of court. I asked for a copy of every recorded instrument on the 12 acres. Deeds, donations, everything. The second was to a woman named Renata Vance in the state fraud unit, whose number I'd kept from a wildfire relief job 3 years back. When I'd watched a dozen families get robbed by the same man who was supposed to be rebuilding their homes, I told her I might have a document problem. She said, "Tired, honey, it's storm season." I've got nothing but document problems. The third call I made to a base personnel office, and I asked them to pull my activation orders, the exact federal orders, with dates for August of 2017. Because here is what my brother forgot. In 20 years of resenting me, he only ever saw the postcards. He never once thought about the postmarks. I drove back to the camp with a manila folder on the passenger seat, and I didn't open it in front of anyone. I put it under the bench seat next to the survival kit. Next to the carabiner I've carried on every hoist I've ever run. A scratched-up steel oval that has had a stranger's whole weight hanging off of it more times than I can count. I don't know why I keep it in the truck. I think part of me needs to know, when I walk into a room where I'm nobody, that there's proof somewhere close by that I've been the last thing between a person and the end. That night Josie came and found me on the porch again. She had the Houston postcard in her hand. She'd taken it down off her wall. "Grandpa tried to throw all of them out once," she said. Grandma let him carry the box to the burn barrel. I got it back before he lit it. They don't know. She handed me the Houston card. You keep this one, she said. In case. I didn't ask in case of what. A 9-year-old shouldn't have to explain that. I put it in my chest pocket. And I thought, the box went to the burn barrel, and not one adult in that house reached for it. A child did. Remember that, whatever else you take from this. When my whole bloodline had a chance to save the record of me, they walked it to the fire, and the only hands that stopped it were 9 years old. On the counter, the hand crank radio buzzed, and the Lake Charles man said the low had strengthened, and the track had shifted, and residents in the low-lying parishes should consider their options tonight, not tomorrow. Wade came out, glanced at the sky, which was doing nothing yet, and said, "They always say that. Sells generators." And he went to bed. Nobody moved the boats. Nobody filled the tanks. I lay awake and listened to a screen door that has never latched, lifting and setting itself against the frame, all night, like something out there was trying to get in. By morning, it had. The storm came faster than the man on the radio said, and the man on the radio had said fast. I woke to water already in the yard. Not rising, risen. The gravel lot was gone. The bottom step was gone. And that changes something in a body like mine. There's a switch, and it throws itself. And the woman who sits quiet at her father's table is simply not there anymore. In her place is somebody who thinks in checklists. I got everybody up. My father wanted to argue about it. I did not argue. I have carried grown men twice his size to a hoist while they screamed at me, and I have learned that you do not argue with fear, you give it something to do. Harlan. Grab the radio and the water jugs. Now. Go. And he went. Because for once in his life there was a voice in the room that knew exactly what it was doing, and some animal part of him recognized it before his pride could catch up. My own father took an order from me and lived, and I don't think either of us has ever forgiven the other for it. I moved them up. Camp's on stilts, so up is the attic, then the metal roof. I cut a hole in the soffit with a hatchet to give us a way out onto the roof if the water kept coming, and it kept coming. Tammy was hyperventilating, and I talked her down in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, flat and warm at the same time. Breathe with me in for 4. That's it. You're doing fine. Because that voice isn't mine exactly. It belongs to the job. It belongs to 9 people I couldn't save and 41 I could, and it comes out of me whether I want it to or not. The strangest thing I have ever seen, I saw from that roof. The fire ants had come off the ground. When the water rises fast enough, they don't drown. They link legs, thousands of them, and they float. A living raft the size of a dinner plate, reddish-brown, riding the current. 3 of them drifted past the porch while I was tying Josie to the chimney with a length of extension cord. A whole civilization holding on to each other so they wouldn't go under. I remember thinking, even then, smart. That's how you survive a thing like this. You hold on to each other. And then I looked back through the hole in the roof at my family, each of them holding on to themselves, and I didn't have time to feel it, so I filed it away, and I'm feeling it now. Wade's truck was the one that went first. Floated actually lifted off its tires and swung around out in what used to be the yard 300 feet off, while Wade watched from the roof with an expression I'd never seen on him. Because Wade had been in his own house when it started, and he'd stood at his own window, looking across at the camp where his mother and his daughter were, and he'd had to decide. Swim for them. Or wait. And he'd waited a beat too long, and now there was too much water between his door and ours, and he had to climb his own roof and wait for someone to come. Someone came. But it wasn't for him. I heard the airframe before I saw it. You always do. An HH-60 doesn't sound like a news helicopter or a hospital bird. It has a specific beat, a rotor signature I have felt in my own sternum 1,000 times. And I stood up on that roof holding my mother. The same mother who never once stood up for me at that table, and I knew that sound the way you know your own name. They came in low over the marsh. And on the radio, Josie had the hand crank set clutched to her chest. The interagency freak crackled, and a voice came through a rescue crew chief running the operation, and he was reading off addresses and grid coordinates. And then he said, "Be advised we've got a possible on the ground here, previous rotary call sign, Rook." And I keyed nothing, because I had nothing to key. But I stood up tall on that roof and I put one arm straight up and made a fist, which is a thing that means something specific to people who do what I do, and the bird tilted. And the crew chief's voice changed. Correction. That's not a possible, that's Rook. Ma'am, is that you? I will not pretend I didn't feel it. 30 years of, she flies a desk and a master sergeant. I'd flown a Harvey rotation with in 2017, was hanging out the door of a pave hawk looking down at me on my father's roof. And the whole apparatus of the thing I actually am, the training, the trust, the language. The beat in my chest came down out of the sky and hovered over the exact family that had spent my whole life pretending it wasn't real. I didn't get in the aircraft. I ran the ground. Because that's what you do. You don't take the first seat, you make sure the aircraft's time gets spent on the people who can't help themselves, and that meant I put my mother in the basket first. And then Josie, and then Tammy and I stood on the roof and coordinated with a crew I knew in a language my family had never once heard me speak, and I got every single person off that roof, including my father. The man who told me, 3 days before, that he served and I only play at it. I put my own father in a rescue basket with my own 2 hands and sent him up into a sky full of the exact thing he'd spent 30 years insisting I wasn't. And I watched the one God he'd ever really worshipped. Service the real thing done for real reach down out of the weather and lift him to safety in his own daughter's arms. He looked at me the whole way up. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The land didn't try to kill anybody. Paper did that, later and quieter, and it's the part I actually care about. They set us up at a Red Cross shelter and a high school gym, 2 parishes over, cots and box fans, and that particular smell of wet clothes and industrial coffee. On the second day, an insurance adjuster came through with a clipboard, and Wade got in line because Wade is always thinking about the money, and I heard him give his name. And I heard him say the word sole owner of the property, and I felt the window I'd been flying toward for 3 days finally line up. I didn't say anything to Wade. I walked outside to the parking lot, and I called Renata Vance, the fraud investigator, and I told her what I had. And she drove out the next morning in a state car with a cracked windshield, and she sat down at a folding table in the corner of that gym with my manila folder and a cup of coffee. And she was not there for me, and she was not there for Wade. She was there for the document. She laid it out flat. It was an act of donation, the Louisiana kind. The parish uses civil law, so it's donations and usufructs. Not the deeds you're used to, in which Delia Rourke donated her undivided 1/2 interest in the 12 acres to her brother Wade Rourke, notarized. 2 witnesses. My signature, in blue ink. Dated the 29th of August, 2017. Wade was standing there, Tammy behind him. My father in a folding chair, my mother beside him, hands folded in her lap, present for once and clear enough to follow it. That's her signature, Wade said. She signed it. In front of a notary. In the parish. Renata Vance didn't argue with him. She's not that kind, she just set 2 more things on the table, side by side with the donation. The first was a single sheet. My federal activation orders. Title 10, Mobilized. Reporting to a staging area outside Houston, Texas. Effective the 26th of August, 2017, released the 11th of September. The second was a postcard. Josie had run and gotten it out of my pocket without my asking, because a 9-year-old understood the assignment. Greetings from Houston. Orange letters. Postmarked in a smeared but legible circle, Houston, TX, Aug 29, 2017. Renata Vance put her finger on the notary date. Then she moved it to the postmark, then to the orders. She did it slowly, so everyone in that corner of the gym could follow along the way you'd walk a child through it. This says she signed a document, in person, in front of a notary and 2 witnesses, in this parish, on August 29th. She tapped the orders. On August 29th, she was federally mobilized to Houston. She tapped the postcard. On August 29th, she mailed a postcard from Houston, to a little girl. She looked up at my brother, not unkindly. She wasn't in the parish, Mr. Rourke. She was 800 miles away, pulling people off of roofs. So whoever signed this, it wasn't her. And that means somebody forged it. And forging a notarial act is a felony in this state. The gym kept doing what gyms do. Somebody's kid was crying 2 rows over. A box fan rattled. Wade's face did a thing I'd never seen it do. He opened his mouth and what came out wasn't words, just the front half of a couple of them, and his phone slid out of his hand and clattered on the gym floor, and he didn't pick it up. He said my name once. Dell. And then he turned around and walked out the side door of that gymnasium into the parking lot, and he did not come back in for a long time. My father didn't move. He just looked at the table at the 3 pieces of paper at the orders with the eagle on them. The eagle, the real one, federal. The exact insignia he'd spent a lifetime saluting and a lifetime refusing to see on me. And for once in 30 years the man had nothing to measure and no yardstick to measure it with. And he turned his face away from me and looked at the wall. And here is the part I keep coming back to, the part I did not expect and cannot make clean. I looked at my mother. And for 1 second I let myself think that this was it, that 50 years were finally going to break open that clear-eyed and present as she was in that moment. She would look at the forged donation and the federal eagle and finally say the thing. She looked up at me. Her hands were steady. Her mind was all the way there. And she said, "Is Wade going to be all right? Is he going to go to jail?" Not a word for the daughter whose name had just been proven stolen. Her first thought, her clear thought with her whole mind, was for the son who stole it. That is not the disease. I want to be very careful with you about that because it would be easier to blame the disease. That was my mother, lucid, choosing, exactly the way she chose at every dinner for 50 years. The dementia would come for the rest. But that choice was hers, and it was old, and it was made long before her mind began to go. I only said one thing, in that whole gymnasium, and I said it quietly, and it wasn't to Wade, and it wasn't to my father, and it wasn't to my mother. I said it to Renata Vance, and I said, "Thank you. That's all I needed on the record." Because it was. I didn't need him ruined, I needed it true. I've had time to think about what I want to leave you with, and I'll be honest that I don't have it all clean. Here's the part I'm still not settled on. My brother committed a felony. He forged my name to steal land from a sister he'd decided didn't deserve it. There's no version of that I'll defend. But he also spent 20 years doing the unglamorous, invisible, grinding work of taking care of a woman who was losing herself. The appointments, the 2 a.m. phone calls, the slow, terrible arithmetic of watching your mother disappear. And I wasn't there for any of it. I was on rooftops. And every postcard I sent, thinking it said I love you, landed in that house like a receipt for my absence. So when you ask who wronged who, I don't have a clean answer, and I'm suspicious of anyone who does. I think 2 things that don't cancel each other out are both true. Wade was robbed of a sister, and I was robbed of my own name. And only one of those things is a crime, but both of them are a loss. But I've stopped extending that grace to my parents, and I want to be honest about why. Because there's a difference. Wade was in the mess with me. He stayed, he carried a real weight, and resentment that grows out of real weight is a human thing I can hold. My father carried nothing. His entire contribution for 50 years was to sit at the head of a table and decide I was less. And to keep deciding it right up until the moment a federal aircraft lifted him off a roof in my arms. And my mother's entire contribution was to watch him do it and study her plate, and then, on the one clear day it counted, to worry about whether her son would go to jail. I can hold Wade's grievance. I cannot find the bottom of theirs, because there isn't one. There was never anything down there but a decision. Now, I'll say the other thing too, because I promised you I wouldn't make anyone cardboard. My mother was a girl in a sash in 1966 who married a man who measured people in a time and a place that told a woman her whole job was to keep his peace. She was shaped by the same yardstick I was. She is, in her way, another person that man made small. I can see that. I can even grieve it. It just doesn't put her hand back on my side of the table. What I do know is this. I spent 30 years letting the people at that table keep a small version of me because I thought shrinking was the same as loving. It isn't. Shrinking is just disappearing politely. I confused being needed with being seen. I thought if I fixed enough generators and refilled enough propane, one day my father would look up and know me, and my mother would put down her plate. Neither of them ever did. The only person in that entire bloodline who saw me plainly, who kept the record of me when the adults walked it to the burn barrel, was a 9-year-old girl with a wall full of postcards. They tell you revenge is a fire. Mine wasn't a fire, it was a postmark. It was a date, in a smeared circle of ink, that had been sitting in a child's bedroom for 9 years, waiting to be true out loud. The biggest revenge was never going to be watching my brother lose everything, or watching my father run out of yardstick. It was finally stopping. After 3 decades, the thing I was doing to myself. I stopped disappearing. The land is mine now, legally. The parish voided the donation on a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after the water went down, and put the 12 acres back in both our names, the way my grandfather left them. Here's the thing that actually ended it, and I find it almost funny now. The notary whose seal was stamped on that forged act had been dead since 2015, 2 years before the date somebody typed on the page. That was the whole case, in the end. A dead man's stamp on a document my hand never touched, dated a summer I spent 800 miles away on other people's roofs. Renata didn't even need me to say a word. The paper confessed on its own. But you should know what I won. I won 12 acres of drowned marsh with a camp on it that the water took down to the pilings. I won a dead thing. There is no house to sit the porch of anymore. The screen door that never latched is somewhere out in the Gulf. I own the exact patch of ground my own blood fought me for, and it will not grow anything for years. I dropped the criminal complaint. I want to tell you that was mercy, and maybe some of it was, but mostly it was for Josie. She is the only person in that family I'd walk into water for twice, and a 9-year-old should not have to grow up visiting her father in a courtroom because of what he did to her aunt. So I let it go for her. Wade and I do not speak. I think that's honest, and I've made my peace with honest. My father I will never speak to again, and I made that peace even easier. He is exactly who he decided to be, and he decided it a long time ago, and there is nothing left in that man for me to reach. My mother is in a memory care place now. A good one, near me. Most days she doesn't know me. There's a tin of postcards on her nightstand. I put it there, or an aide did. I honestly don't remember which of us. And sometimes she'll hold greetings from Houston up to the light and trace the orange letters with one finger. I used to think that meant something. Now I think she just likes the color. She never found my name when she was well. It would be a strange thing to need her to find it now. I visited last month and she looked up at me from that chair, clear as a bell for a second, and asked me who I was. And I told her my name. And she nodded, politely, at a stranger. And I want you to understand. That didn't break me the way you'd think. Because she never really saw me when her mind was whole. The not knowing now is just the last, honest form of a thing that was true my whole life. It only hurts as much as it always did, which is to say, exactly. I keep the Houston card in my truck now, right next to the carabiner. 2 pieces of proof, writing under the bench seat, proof that I caught 41 people, and proof that when I was falling, one person in that whole family caught me. She was 9. She's the reason I still bother. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It took me 51 years a hurricane, and a postcard to learn that the people who are supposed to see you first are not always the people who ever will, and that you are allowed to stop waiting at that table and go be, for someone else, the one who sees. So let me ask you, have you ever let your own family believe a smaller version of you just to keep a piece that was never yours to keep? Have you ever confused being needed with being seen? And is there a receipt somewhere in your life? A date? A photo? A card in a child's handwriting? That quietly proves you were exactly where you were supposed to be. Even when the people who made you swore you weren't. If any of this landed, type, return receipt in the comments. I read them. And if these stories mean something to you, share this with someone who has been made small by the very people who should have known them best. And subscribe and turn on notifications. Because there's a new one every week. Take care of yourself out there, hold on to each other, and I'll see you in the next one.